I have great pleasure on behalf of Ananta Aspen to welcome you here this evening at the beginning of a new program. Just to give you an idea of what we do in international affairs. We have a Council for Strategic and International Affairs, which consists of eminent diplomats, academicians, economists, parliamentarians, and businessmen, which oversees our international affairs. And the programs consist of strategic dialogues with 10 countries, public sessions, closed-door sessions with experts, copies of which we share with our members. We have about 8 advisors, and they give periodic reports on different aspects. We have on West Asia a bi-monthly report. We have on Russia a monthly report. We have quarterly reports on Latin America and Central Asia, and so on. The other areas covered are East Asia, Africa. In addition to these, we are thinking of also doing something with the student community in India as a program which is under consideration. But today, we have launching this new program on the Ambassador Series. You know, and I myself have been a diplomat, and we know that ambassador is no longer the ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary of the 17th century. With the technological developments, heads of governments are meeting every day, but still he is the authorized representative of a country. So we thought we should start this series to get the viewpoints of the ambassador. Now, why Israel have we chosen for the first lecture? Well, the first is that we are on the eve of the first ever visit of the Prime Minister of India to Israel. Secondly, this is the year which completes 25 years of diplomatic relations. Though I must tell you that in spite of that, there are several interesting episodes. We take our relations even back before that, 71 and other one, but that's another story. Then, as far as Israel's exports are concerned of armaments, India is probably one of the largest, and we are today the third largest. Israel is for our imports of armaments. Israel is probably the third largest source of our supplies. But it's not just restricted to armaments. We have different areas like food security, water management, cybersecurity, and so on. So all these help in taking the relationship to this new height. And we at Ananta Aspen have had a strategic dialogue. Ananta Aspen, the Confederation of Indian Industries, and the Tel Aviv University for 10 years. And each time we go there, we travel to Jerusalem, where we are privileged to be received by the President of Israel. So it is so there's a special fondness in Ananta Aspen with Israel. And one reason that we have is that we want you to be the first speaker, Ambassador Daniel Carmon. You have his biodata, so I'm not going to repeat that. And we are very fortunate that Indrani, the diplomatic correspondent of the Times of India, will be conducting the rest of the program. And I have great pleasure in requesting His Excellency, Mr. Daniel Carmon, Ambassador of Israel, to deliver his address. Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Lambah, and good afternoon to this very important crowd of people who came to hear a word or two from us on the growing partnership between India and Israel, which is something that I think that in history books will be written as a very special and unique relationship that goes through a process that many of you have accompanied from the beginning, from when it started. We usually say that the relation started 25 years ago. I think maybe a little before that, but the issue of India-Israel relations, both on the people-to-people point of view and definitely on the governmental point of view, is something that I know many books have already been written, but in the perspective of, let's say, a few years from now, I'm sure it will be in the international relation textbooks as one of the most fascinating processes that international relations has seen. I can tell you, as a diplomat who has been in business for a couple of years, I've met in different junctures the very special topic of India-Israel's relations, both on the bilateral level, on the multilateral level. We always had the speciality of the uniqueness of those relations somewhere as someone that was always intriguing and fascinating, if it is our leaders who have always shown interest on the one hand, and the global atmosphere of the time in the 60s, in the 50s, in the 60s, which I always give as an example, as Israeli diplomat goes in the hall and our neighbors from the Arab countries would walk out of the hall. This is something very vivid because as a kid I remember that from news reports, and it was always something that was almost offending, I would say, on the personal level, but it exemplified something that is gone. I mean, those times have changed. Those times have changed because our region has changed. Those times have changed because the very abrupt game between non-aligned and the others and the aligned, the treatment, the boycott, the fact that Israel was sometimes looked at as not only a special country somewhere in West Asia, but there was some policy, some group policy, some dynamics that put Israel in a very very difficult position. Those times are gone. Nowadays, West Asia, or nowadays Middle East, is made of a different fabric that it was made so many years ago, when, if we look at the India-Israel relations, the India-Israel relations were either non-existent or at their first steps. And I'm looking at you, and I'm seeing so many familiar faces of people who know a lot about Indo-Israel relations. So I'm not going to give you anything that has to do with the basics of those relations or the process, but I think that the process is a remarkable process, something really to not only to talk about, but to look at with admiration. I'm not objective. I'm a player, a practitioner who breathes, sleeps, wakes up, and thinks India, Israel, for more than the 3 years that I've been here in service, much more. I was stationed at the United Nations, and the Indo-Israel relations were there for a long time. I was the head of the Israeli Agency for International Development Cooperation, Mashav, which is an agency whose biggest project outside of Israel is in India, in agriculture, a very special configuration of a huge project. For us, it's huge. Maybe for India, it's not that huge, but we know how India values, how the farmers value, how the government of states and federal value. We know that it's a very important facet in our relations. So I was there, and I felt that when I came here, I came as a continuation of something that is very much in the content of our bilateral relations. And the last thing I would like to say in those really opening remarks, because I'll be really glad to do more of an interactive questions and answers. I hope I will have the answers. I'd like to touch upon something that Ambassador Lambah has talked about, which is a new kind of diplomacy, I would say. A diplomacy that is not based on what I knew when I entered the Foreign Service, and some of the people I see here when they entered the Foreign Service. Diplomacy is changing its nature in a very abrupt way. It's also a process, but it's a very strong process. A diplomat nowadays is not a diplomat of the 50s, of the 60s, where we were much more limited, or our predecessors were much more limited into the work between MEAs, MFAs, diplomatic work, diplomatic political work, a bit of commerce here and there, but things are totally different nowadays. And if you look at the Israeli embassy in Delhi and what are we made of, the fabric of the Israeli embassy in Delhi reflects the fabric of the relations between India and Israel, and we deal a lot with agriculture and with water, and we became experts on health, on commerce, on Israeli companies, we all of a sudden, as diplomats, we do and we have our very good and strong political MEA, MFA relationship, but we deal with so many other issues. We are very much integrated into working with the states of India. We are very much integrated in working with the civil society, with the public, and not necessarily with government. So the diplomat is changing its nature, and in this light, if we reflect, and we want to reflect, the very strong fabric of Indo-Israel relations, we are here doing a new kind of diplomacy, and if through your questions you would like me to elaborate on this also, I'll be very glad to do this. So we are passing, as you all know, very, very good times in our relations between India and Israel. I think I'm talking often with my colleagues, both in Mumbai and Bangalore, who are leading the effort in their own respective regions. And I'd like to put in parentheses the fact that we have now here in the crowd the new Israeli Consul General to Bangalore, who's now my deputy, and she's will be moving from being my deputy in Delhi to the Consul General in Bangalore, Consul General in southern India. And when I talk with my colleagues in Bangalore and Mumbai, we really felicitate ourselves and celebrate the fact that we could not, as diplomat, ask for a better time to serve in India than this particular time. The question, is it the peak? And I always tend to say yes, it's a peak today, but the peak is still waiting for us, and I hope we will never reach the peak, because we will be ascending and ascending and ascending even more in something that is a very important, very special and very unique relationship, which is our growing partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Carmon. I think the way we'll take this forward is I'll use my moderator's privilege and shoot off the first couple of questions to both of you, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Mr. Lambah, may I begin with you? You sort of tantalizingly left a little bit of storytelling in your opening remarks about the relations between India and Israel going back to much before 1992. You went as far back as 1971. Would you like to give us a little bit of of a story there.
Oh. That was Indrani, an off-the-cuff remark. But the ambassador has already spoken. He said the relations go much beyond that. But you have raised an interesting point. You mentioned 71. Well, you know, it was common knowledge that Israel had supported India in 65 and 71, but it was never spoken about. Recently, my very distinguished colleague and friend, Ambassador C. Dasgupta, has been working on the papers of Mr. P.N. Haksar in the Nehru Museum. And he has come out with some information which, the things which we knew are now public, so I could share it with you since you have raised this. In 1971, I will mention two things. First, I will not refer to his papers. I think it was June. You see, I had opened the Indian embassy in Bangladesh towards the end of 71. But in 71, I had accompanied Mani Dixit to open the mission. In June that year, the foreign minister of Israel, speaking in the Israeli parliament, referred to two things. He said the statement, and he said that there was genocide in East Bengal. Now, these were two very significant words. Those of you who remember those days would know. Except for us, very few countries referred to now Bangladesh as East Bengal those days. They referred to it as East Pakistan. He used the word East Bengal, and those of us who were in Delhi working in the ministry were very excited at you. And secondly, he used the word genocide. So now I come to the second part of it. Later that year, we ran short of some mortars. Mr. P.N. Haksar, when he was Deputy High Commissioner in London, knew an Israeli friend. He approached him. He was the head of a company. And he approached him, can you help me in sending these mortars? His reply was yes, but he said, obviously he needed approval. And he then sent him a letter from Prime Minister Golda Meir, which is now publicly available. It's in Mr. Haksar's record. And that letter said, yes, I don't remember the exact word, permission granted. Secondly, please let it be known to Mrs. Gandhi that Israel is supportive of this. That is what I am giving you a concrete information of Israeli help to India, about which is now public knowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Lambah. Mr. Carmon, of course, we'd like you to dwell on something that will happen in a couple of weeks, which is the Prime Minister's visit. This will be the first time the Prime Minister, an Indian Prime Minister, will be visiting Israel, and a visit that is of tremendous both importance and interest, because has it not been that Israel has been India's favorite mistress, and in a way we are now coming out of the closet. Is that how you would describe our relationship? And if you could give us a flavor of what will happen, what do we expect from the Prime Minister's visit when he goes there a couple of weeks later?
Let me start by saying something that I would like to say, because it is part of our respect for our hosts and for the tradition. The diplomatic tradition, the protocol tradition, we have here in the hall, and it might sound like a funny story, but we have in the hall two players that had to do with a phone conversation that I got a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, on the verge of the presidential visit. We had a press briefing on something at the embassy. We had a press briefing on something totally unrelated to the presidential visit, the President of India's visit.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. We had a briefing at the embassy on something that had to do with water, agriculture, something like this, right, Dana? And then we as part of the briefing, we said something that had to do with the presidential visit. And then someone from the MEA called me and said, you announced the visit, which is an unannounced visit. You cannot announce a visit. We did not have the intention to announce a visit, but we actually did. Now we are in the same situation nowadays.
Let us say a hypothetical visit.
So the expected visit by Prime Minister Modi on that and that July. No, I can say July. So I'm not trying to evade the question. I'm not trying to evade the fact that Prime Minister Modi is going to visit Israel for a visit that I don't think I can explain in words the importance of this visit. Maybe you can explain in words the importance of the visit because you are following Israel and Indo relations for so many years. As Prime Minister Modi said a few weeks ago when he spoke to a crowd in Gujarat, he said, I will be going to Israel in July. So who am I to say something about that? I think that one comment that I would like to make in response to what you said or following what you said, when I meet people here in India, people who are interested in international relations, in India's stand vis-a-vis the world, its relations with Israel, I find an immense knowledge, unbelievable knowledge to the details of the relations. And what you have told us now, I hear from time to time from people in this room and in other audiences, and I'm amazed. I'm amazed to hear how much the relations between India and Israel are. I don't want to give notes or marks or say important or not important, but it looks as if throughout history people have, and I'm talking about recent history, 70 years, people have accompanied those relations and know issues and events and non-events to the last detail. And I think it says something. It says something. Now, talking about the expected visit by Prime Minister Modi, we can go through the last drafts of the program, but I'm not sure that this is the important thing. The important thing, if I may, is the mere fact that the Prime Minister of India will be visiting Israel. I think this by itself says so much. Usually this is a sentence, and I can tell you that in Israel it's a sentence that usually says, okay, I don't want to say anything, so I'll say the importance of the meeting was the meeting itself, ciao. This is not what I want to say this time. I think that if you look at the trajectory of the relations, 92 or before, 71 or after, when you look at the trajectory of the relations, when you look how the relations fit in something more global, Israel's stand vis-a-vis the West, the way Israel was perceived in the past and maybe perceived differently today as being part of some kind of a bloc or not. The very special relations that Israel has with the US or with Europe or with other players. The fact that for so many years, Israel did not really look east. We did not look east for various reasons. Maybe we were not welcome to look east, but we did not look east. And then at one point, and you know, it happened by coincidence in 91, 92, maybe it has to do with some global things that happened at the time. So if you look at the trajectory, if you look at the content, if you look at what evolved since 92, and you see where were we in 92 and where are we now, how does the visibility of things fit in, mistress, carpet, cupboard, all those, you know, in Hebrew it sounds better, by the way.
I've heard it.
You heard it. And people use it, yes. I have to say. The more we advance in our relations, the less we like the, but of course, for years it has been like that. And it's not only the description, it also is the symbolism behind it and the price tag we had to pay. Because we had to pay a price tag by not being visible. The price tag for all sorts of things. You want relations, let's lower them, let's not talk about it, and you'll get other things. So this price tag is gone. We are still in a process. There are a few things we have to, to cross until the, how should I call it, normalization is full. We still bear some complexes, not too many, by the way, but we still have some traditional issues to go through. But we are there, and presidential visits and ministerial visits that we have seen in the last 3 years, the two presidents visiting each other's countries, something was huge, huge events, and were received that way in Israel also. So as a start, I would say the importance of the expected visit by Prime Minister Modi is in itself with all what it symbolizes, but it symbolizes more than anything else the fact that the Prime Minister of India visits Israel.
Thank you. You just spoke about some of the issues that still need to be resolved. I know that we've progressed really far in our bilateral relations, but on the multilateral forum, and you've served in the UN, we still take older positions, sort of as traditional positions. When do you expect that we would, or are you becoming more comfortable with our traditional positions, or do you expect that we will change those positions?
When you represent Israel at the United Nations, and where your Prime Minister attaches great importance, our Prime Minister attaches great importance to I would say, the stand that Israel has in the international community, because we are a very normal country, but at the United Nations, if you hear the conversation at the United Nations and the narrative at the United Nations, I mean, you can pass any resolution because of an automatic vote at the United Nations. Any resolution, as long as it has Israel in the resolution, you can say anything. The world is flat, the world is not, I mean, anything. Sometimes the resolutions are totally detached from reality. I just want to give you as an example a couple of resolutions in the last 12 months in which more or less our adversaries at the United Nations have tabled resolutions that say that Jerusalem and the Jewish people have nothing to do with each other, something like that at UNESCO. So this is really an extremity, but it goes beyond that. So of course we attach great importance to, it's not like a football game where we want everyone to cheer for one side or the other, but it's an issue, and I think that the multilateral treatment that we get is one thing, but it has also symbolism in the bilateral arena. So when you can say, and maybe this was part of the conversation with some countries who would tell us, don't really pay attention to what's going on in the United Nations. There is a big difference between multilateral and bilateral. So let's go for the bilateral. The multilateral, bear with us. We have other obligation, and it's fine. And for many years, we agreed to this, or we accepted this as the price tag. I go back to the price tag. I think that in the last 3 years, part of the bilateral and regional approach of India still is, and I think it's a very, if I may say, a very important statement that India has made. something that says we have good relations with the Arab world, we are committed to the Palestinian cause, something to that effect, and we have good relations, and we want to maintain good relations with Israel. This dual approach, which is not coinciding, not contradicting each other, is a very sober and very reflective and very positive way of looking at the relations with our region. Now, how is this reflected in the multilateral world? Would we want a change or not? I mean, we do converse all the time with MEA on this subject. I think that we have seen in the last few years some changes, definitely in the issue of UNESCO. I mean, India could not accept this really ridiculous statement or resolution that was tabled in UNESCO. I think that we are seeing a slow process. We will always want to have the world vote for us or oppose votes, especially if they are ridiculous, against us, and we will continue doing so, and we will continue talking to all our, especially to all our friends, for change in this. The question is, should it be a gradual change? Should it be an abrupt change? Should it be an automatic change? All of this is in our conversation. I can tell you that we are seeing a change, and our bilaterals are also reflected in our multilaterals. And this is something we can be, maybe not, we won't, there is no big festival to celebrate it, but I can definitely know that there is a change in this, and the stand of India at the United Nations towards the reflect the statement that I mentioned to you before on both tracks that are not a zero-sum game.
Right. And open up to the audience, the gentleman at the back, if you could please identify yourselves and keep your questions short because we'd like to accommodate as many as we can.
Thank you, sir. I am Sagar. I run a media company. We heard you in Teen Murthy also. You spoke very well. Today you are a little composure. My question is that we got the independence at the same time, more or less, South Korea and Israel. But Israel has developed in leaps and bounds, and we are left behind. So this August gathering wants what we should do that we can get in the footprints as Israel.
Thank you.
You.
Shall we take a couple of questions together, or do you want to just answer? Go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
I'm not sure I'm in a position to answer this. What I can tell you is that we are different. We are in different circumstances and areas. I have to say that much of what we have achieved has to do with the fact that the dimension of Israel is relatively small. The decision-making is relatively quick. The threat from around us is a genuine threat, not only in the geopolitical thing. It's not only that all Arab countries decided the day after our independence to attack us, so we had to develop a system of security, food security, health. I mean, we started a nation from scratch. We both had a nation-building process, of course, but look, what does it mean to manage a huge subcontinent like India compared to nation build in Israel? So I'm not sure I can compare both. We are very satisfied with our achievements. Not only are we satisfied with our achievements, we are glad to share the result of our development laboratory with our friends, and we do that. And India is definitely on when needed, and if needed, we are there, but not as helpers. We are here as partners, and growing partnership is not a word that we chose just like this. And if you look at, again, at the content of our relations, it's exactly that. Will Israeli technology change, or does it have to change the traditions, the hundreds of years of traditions of India? I don't know, and I don't think so. But can we contribute, if needed and if asked, from our experience and knowledge and know-how to India? Why not, if needed and if asked? But to try to compare why, I'm not sure I'm in a position to do that, and I think it's too much of a big question.
Thank you. Anil.
Anil Vadva, and I'm retired from the Indian Foreign Service, and as part of my career, I used to deal with Israel as well. Ambassador, I have a couple of questions, and this is not in the context of the expected visit of the Prime Minister, because I know you wouldn't like to talk about what is going to happen, etc., at this stage. But I'm asking your personal views and how you see the relationship developing in these fields. First of all, in the field of space, there was a time when India and Israel used to collaborate quite a bit, very closely, and that was the early part of this century. And after that, we saw a bit of a slowdown. I really don't know what the reasons were, but you tried to catch up after that. And do you see this as a growing area of convergence in the future? And second is the question about university-to-university collaboration, especially in the high-tech area. So, for example, robotics, driverless cars, which is something that both countries are working in at the moment. So how far do you see this developing in the future?
Thank you very much, and I'm very privileged to answer you, specifically you. We've been working so much together during your tenure as Secretary East, and we were together in Jerusalem during the presidential visit. And I'm really honored to try to answer a question specifically from you. Space is definitely there. I cannot tell you why exactly it slowed down. Maybe the systems, the ecosystems had some lack of convergence. I don't know. I cannot explain. I don't know enough about that, frankly speaking. But I can tell you, looking ahead and looking at the last few months, in which we were privileged enough to host, India hosted, but we facilitated hosting our Science and Technology Minister. He was accompanied by the head of our space agency, who had good meetings in Bangalore with ISRO. And I think that if you look at I know that if you will look at the menu of activities, not necessarily who will see what during a visit, but what is the content. Space is definitely there. In the last, one of the achievements of ISRO in the last few months was the launching of a rocket with 104 nano satellites. Two of them were from the Israeli academia who joined. So we were facilitated, we were helped by the technology, the wonderful technology of this great organization called ISRO that India is so proud, and rightly so proud about. And I think that I know that space is definitely going to be one of the growing areas of concern. And by the way, this is why Dana is going to be Consul General in Bangalore, working with ISRO for sure, right? The second question has academia. Academia is a growing, is definitely a growing area, and more universities from Israel look at have India on their map and on their radar. I did not talk about it before, but I think it's a good opportunity to mention. I mean, the India-Israel forum that Ananta Aspen is so generous in hosting together with the other partners. The Israeli partner is one of the leading universities in Israel, a university that does not look, Tel Aviv University, a university that does not look does not look short term, does not look at students or research papers or one agreement or one MOU. They look farther, much farther than that. They invest their thoughts and their minds about how to liaise with India in terms of 10, 12, 15 years, which is something that did not happen before. We are witnessing more and more universities from Israel being interested in liaising with Indian universities. I can tell you that 10% of the foreign students in Israel are from India. It does not say that we're not talking about thousands, because we don't have tens of thousands of foreign students in Israel. The dimensions are still, but 10% is huge, and it's growing. One of our ministers who was here, at the time he was finance minister, now he's the energy and the water minister, Dr. Steinitz, who was here, visited India a few years ago. He was so impressed by the potential that he gave instructions, and since then, dozens of postdocs from India study in Israel. When the Minister of Agriculture of India visited Israel, he had a meeting. He was amazed, a meeting with a few dozens postdocs in agriculture that are spending a few months or a year in Israel. Part of the programs that will be not announced but celebrated, I would say, through MOUs or agreements in the next few months have exactly that. Some of them are between academic institutions and themselves. It's a little on the sidelines of visits, of official visits, because they are not governmental. But some of the governmental activity or interaction will have academia on their agenda. During the presidential visit in Israel that we accompanied, there was about 10 MOUs that were signed between universities. When our president came here last year, more than 25 MOUs were signed between universities and institutions. And those MOUs, some of them, not all of them, but some of them are being implemented in action and in activities. I think that we are going to see much more activity on the academic side, be it agriculture, be it water, be it IT, cyber security, and other areas of joint concerns, and other areas that are on the top of the agenda in Israel as capabilities, and in India as needs. One thing that I must caution in this, and this is something we'll have to work on, and I'm not sure we'll have good results, I don't see the hundreds of students from Israel coming to study in India, and this brings some inequality to the equation. But this is something that we will have to take up.
Thank you. Gentleman here.
Thank you. My name is Vijay Massoud. I was part of the founding group that set up Maruti Udyog that changed the automotive industry. When we started in 1982, we were a country with 44,000 cars produced annually. We now do almost 4 million, and we're expected to do 4 million. The statistic I think that is relevant to what my question to you is the auto component sector. When we started, India's auto component exports were about $6 million, low-grade filters and things like that. Today, there are around $16 billion of exports to the US, to Europe, to Japan. And they're expected to touch about $20 billion in the next 2 or 3 years. The question and the opportunity I wish to highlight, and I think this needs attention on both sides, is of components, high-tech components for the aerospace sector. My friend Anil referred to space, but if you look at the aircraft sector, particularly with the dimensions of civil aviation and the dimensions of defense aviation. There is a huge opportunity for the high-tech companies in Israel to establish themselves here. And our original thoughts about, equity, majority equity must be Indian and all of this, that is no longer, people realize that in the high-tech sector, we can take a different approach. My short thought to you is that we need to work actively to create an ecosystem that doesn't exist to address this. Just as an immediate market, I might tell you that you're familiar with offsets. We already have an outstanding balance of something, I believe at last count was something around $8 or $9 billion worth of unfulfilled offsets. And the real way you can overcome those offsets is going to come from the aerospace component sector, which is not yet existent in this country but needs to be done. So my suggestion is that's something that deserves special attention to create the ecosystem.
Thank you.
The next up there.
Thanks. Thank you. My name is Himanshu Mittal, and I actually specialize in outward mobility, something which you actually just said, that there is an imbalance of, obviously, a lot of Indian students are going to Israel right now. I mean, I know you said about 10%, but there is obviously certain number of students who will be interested from Israel who wants to come to India. Just to give you a background, I was working with British Council in trying to balance this out. There's a lot of students who go to UK from India. There's only a handful of numbers of students from UK coming to India. The ratio was about 1 to 300. It was a huge imbalance. So I started a program with British Council wherein we invited UK students to come to India on short-term 2-week study in India program. Will that be of interest to Israel government or to the Israel High Commission if they can support something like this, having a 2-week curated program for Israeli students to come out and actually form this kind of bonding with Indian students, raise the profile at both ends in terms of universities at India and Israel, and again have a long-term bilateral relationships, forming those kind of relationships when they come out. Future leaders, as we may say, for them to be.
I'd like to say I have no doubts in my mind. So let's lower this a little bit, a little less than I have no doubts in my mind. But I want to just, maybe it's not an answer, but it's a reference to what you asked. There is a large number of youngsters visiting India after their army service. Tens of thousands of youngsters who spend months in India. There was an idea to try to see how to to bring to their attention the possibility of studying here in university, not necessarily a three-year degree, but a semester or a few months during the summer. And I definitely see this as a possibility, but we have to work out a program that would be attractive, might blend into the agreements that universities have. And when we had those agreements, we had this in mind. So there are programs that were initiated in India for scholars. The Gion, for example, is very well attended by Israeli lecturers and professors and experts. You are asking about students. I think that there is a potential, and we can build on this potential through the visitors. There's so many Israeli youngsters who visit India, and in Israeli universities also. I'm not sure that the ratio will be dramatically changing, but we can advance towards some kind of, not equation, but to better the ratio.
Thank you. Sir.
My name is R.P. Lahiri. I'm a management consultant. My question is there any platform where youths of India and youths of Israel can mix and exchange on cultural areas? On cultural areas.
Cultural exchange.
Have you understood my question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there any platform where Indian youths and the Israeli youths can mix, interchange their ideas, values, and all that on cultural areas?
Yeah, there definitely is. There is. As you know, governments are not too rich with their budgets, I have to say. I can tell you as the Israeli government, we're doing our best, maybe not enough, but we're doing our best. There is some cultural exchange, and there are especially artists that are coming relatively frequently to India. The opposite happens in Israel also, and your embassy is relatively active in this also in Israel. There is a lot of thirst, I would say, in both sides to see more films and artists and performances, and there is a platform. I would love to see this platform, like in other areas, cross from the governmental exchange into something that comes out of maybe private or private, not governmental, sorry? Exactly, social media and others, but this is definitely on our agenda. Thank you for asking.
Okay, my name is Karni Singh. I just wanted to know that about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a huge gas finds in Israel offshore. What exactly is the status of those gas finds, and what was the policy that was used eventually to get that gas in? Did you go in for exports, or it was essentially for the domestic kind of consumption? I mean, where is that gas story? And related question is, since there are so many policy statements and policy changes that happen in India, are there any things or any kind of policies that you've learned not to ever implement in Israel? I mean,
as a country who was blessed with human resources, but not with natural resources, of course, there was an earth-shattering event of discovery of gas offshore of Israel a few years ago. This is a very, I would say, important process that we are going through as we now speak. This process is a complicated one. It has to do with lots of, we have to change our mindset. I mean, it's all new for this small nation of Israel, but we are definitely into it, and there's been a process of a few years of trying to think how, what, and even where. And one of the biggest dilemmas that we had, that our authorities have, and this is a process that takes into consideration government and civil society and the public and the companies. It's a huge and very deep debate. And one of the biggest dilemmas of this debate is what to do with the influx, what to do with the gas. And that's a dilemma that many countries have. And how will this influx of gas influence the economy? There is, I'm sure you're familiar with a terminology, I think it's called the Dutch Malady, right? The Dutch Malady of when it's too good to be true, and it's so good to be true that sorry?
No, go ahead.
It's so good, this discovery of gas is so good, and the influx of money will be so big in such a short time, it might reverse the economy or affect the economy. And each country has its own remedy to this malady. And part of the remedy that we found after a long debate in Israel was to initiate a fund, and I think it's called a fund for the next generation, something like this, meaning that part of the revenue from this gas, so there are two debates, the debate of what to do with the revenues, and the second, how to make the ratio between what will be kept, what will be sold in Israel, and what will be sold as export and as a country that is relying very much on export, it's a very important decision. And some decisions have been already made in this regard, and of course some will be exported. It's a huge, huge change in our economy and in the assets that we bring to the table in many arenas, including our regional, our close region. It's a very important development, but the dilemmas are still, some of the dilemmas are still there.
Thank you.
You want to say something about the Dutch Malady? Okay.
Excellency, I am Das Gupta. Excellency, I am Das Gupta from Diplomatic Square. Now, when we talk about bilateral relations, we normally refer to security, energy security, food, agriculture, industry, which are all very important. But there is one area we don't talk about, which is medical research. And I'm talking about hepatitis B, C, HIV, which have been areas which have been, bedeviling the world since decades. And so can we get to know what is happening in Israel? Because Israel has a wonderful track record of coming out with the researches on medical issues particularly. I believe there is something called a zinc spider for HIV, something for also in hepatitis area, all these areas. So can you enlighten, Excellency?
I'm not sure I can give you a very professional answer on that. I can tell you that the research, including the medical research in Israel, is very, very developed. Israel is a country that allocates around 4% of its GDP to research and development in all fields. And of course, medical field is one of the most important ones. And we have crossed quite a lot of challenges health-wise during, as part of what I described before, which is the continuous nation building. We've become a very important player in the field of medical research, and we also contribute quite a lot to the multilateral arena, WHO, etc. We have to say that as part of our development relations with many countries, especially in Africa, health is very much on our agenda in capacity building, but also in humanitarian assistance. And I know that this is something that is very important to India as a donor. India is a donor of humanitarian help after disasters and after events in many parts of the world, especially in this area. So this we have very much in common with India. The message and also the action to come from a humanitarian aspect, from health aspect and others to help others. And I have to say, with the risk of having a long answer to a short question, I want to tell you one of my experiences here in India was after the Nepal earthquake. India, of course, as a good neighbor, I mean, the effort that was made by India in manpower, in equipment, in rescue, search and rescue operation and medical, and it was unbelievable. We also participated, and within 96 hours in Nepal, with the help with the authorities of India, because our planes had to go through unexpectedly, our jumbo jets and C-130s had to cross Indian airspace. We came within 90 hours. We built a field hospital. We brought 300 search and rescue and hospital staff, and we joined in the international effort, and we were proud to be the second largest force in helping Nepal. So this maybe doesn't answer your question, but it brings you into perspective where we can fit in activities.
Parul?
Ambassador Carmon, I'm Parul Chandra and I'm a journalist. My question is related to the defense sector. Do you see India-Israel defense ties getting a fillip post Prime Minister Modi's visit to Israel? And secondly, how do you see Israeli defense companies contributing to the Indian government's endeavor to have a Make in India element in manufacturing of equipment?
You will not be surprised to hear that we don't talk too much about our defense relations. You're not surprised. I know you're not surprised. You're not surprised. If you were surprised, I would be surprised. So no, we definitely don't. I would like, so I'd rather not, refer specifically to this, but I do want to say that our relations, the bilateral relations between India and Israel, of course, have a defense component. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you would be surprised if I would, try to evade this totally. But we, in the last few years, have seen many other facets, what we call more civilian. They are not less strategic than the defense relations. When you talk about food security, when you talk about water, when you talk about desalination, recycling, those are things that are needed by the country affected, whether Israel or India, not less than the physical security. So I would rather talk about the other elements that we would like to strengthen in our relations, and this is also, I think, what we will see in the coming weeks. You had a very important question about making India, and I can tell you that we are definitely engaged in making India as a priority of the Indian government, and some endeavors that have to do with making India are there. Some plants, joint venture plants of Israeli and Indian companies have been, not too many, but some have been are already at work, and I think, and I would like to stress in this regard, not so much the defense aspect of it, but the fact that Israeli companies join in Indian companies in something that is important to the work market, to the manufacturing, to jobs in India. So I would, of course, we're talking about that will be produced in this plant.
Thank you. I think we are coming to the end of our questions. What I will do is I will take a couple of questions together, Alex, and then you.
Excellency, thank you. I'm Alex from the Singapore High Commission. India is a rising power, and I think there are some in my region that envision a greater role that India can play regionally as well. So my question is, do you similarly see something else or more that India could do in your region, and if so, what might this be?
I'll take we'll take the 3 questions together because we're running out of time. I think, one more question.
This is related to terrorism, and first of all, I like to identify myself. I'm Shankar from Governance Now magazine. So my question is on terrorism front, and on home security. What kind of a role this Israeli companies or Israeli establishment is seeing in India, and how it sees India's narrative about Pakistan, that it is an epicenter of terrorism and it exports terrorism across the world. Thank you.
This would be the last you want to say quickly. Yours is right. We are seriously running out of time.
I won't remember the questions.
If you want the ambassador to say something, I suspect if it's on terror, it would be. I think we'll just put a halt to this now.
On the question of a role was it a role to India? This is what you. Yeah. I think that the role that India, and again, it's not for me to analyze Indian foreign policy. I'd be, I'm not sure it's the right thing to do at all. But if you would ask me, and I don't want to sound negative, I do want to say that, not at all. I do want to say that something very important that will be happening in our region would be if finally we would be able to sit, and this touches upon sensitivities in our region, of course, but to finally be sitting with a partner that understand that we have to debate and to talk politics and to talk peace, and not to have side noises that are more than just noises, which is what we have been seeing in the last 100 years or 69 years or since the Oslo Accords. The importance of the peace process between us and the Palestinians is in the possibility or the feasibility to have direct negotiations. So without answering specifically on India, we would like to have the possibility, and this is what we are, this is the big effort. This is not to say that other players cannot, push here, help there, but I think what we see in the Indian policy, and I want to stress again, the Indian policy of stressing the good relations with the Arab world, which nobody can or should contest, and for us, it's not a matter of discomfort at all. We respect it, and we think it's a good thing to do, and the good relations with Israel that go tandem without influencing any one another, I think is more important than a role or a specific role in a region that is so complicated as such. So I would encourage the continuation of the very good relations with both sides. And apropos, speaking about both sides, you all have to remember that the both sides that we're talking about nowadays are not the both sides that we had a few years ago. The choreography and the architecture of the Middle East has dramatically changed, and we all read the papers, and we all know that it's not so much about Arabs against Jews or Israelis against, or Jews against Muslims or something like this. It's much more moderates against extremists, and in this regard, those who would like, the complexity of our region, I'm not sure is very welcoming. Players, any players, I'm not specifically talking about India, any players that would not be sure that the result of what they want to do is really direct, genuine, direct negotiations, I would say without conditions, that take into consideration the fact that there are two sides. The two sides maybe are unequal in numbers and dimensions, but each side has 50% of the solution.
And not terror.
Terror? I can say one thing about our bilateral relations, and I think this will suffice, and forgive me for not answering all your question. We have 3 years ago signed an important agreement, India and Israel, on homeland security and anti-terrorism. And this agreement is being implemented day in and day out in our relations, that we can only, be content that we have this agreement and that we're implementing it. But I will stay with that.
Thank you, Ambassador Carmon. Thank you for taking the time out to answer so many questions. And I think we will all go back with many, many more questions, but we look forward to the Prime Minister's visit and to see at least the visible parts of the trajectory of the India-Israel relationship, which now looks more and more like an iceberg. Only 1/3 of it is what you can see, and 2/3 that you can't. Which is what makes it exciting and makes at least people in my tribe forever trouble you for questions and stories. But on that note, thank you everybody, and have a good evening.